It was both the corruption of the FBI and the intelligence services, but also the big technology companies themselves. Both of them are at blame. And I think fundamentally, if they had not done what they did, Donald Trump would have won another term as president of the United States.
Hey guys, it's Sai. If you're super curious but don't always have the time to watch your favourite podcasts, you found the right place. Here's your summary of the Joe Rogan Experience number 2221, featuring JD Vance, the 50th Vice President of the United States. In less time than it takes to win the 2024 election. Let's jump in. This marathon of a podcast spanning 3 hours allowed Joe and Vance to discuss a lot of interesting topics. They talked about JD's experience as vice president so far, Trump's assassination attempts and how that affected not only himself but his family, and why transgender women shouldn't compete with biological women in sports. JD Vance discusses the surreal experience of running for vice president. He admits it's pretty weird, especially since he's not used to being without Secret Service around him. He shares the moment he got the VP pick call from Trump, which was during the RNC convention, highlighting how unexpected the call was. Vance describes the relief he felt and the humour of Trump after the initial remark about choosing someone else. No, I'm just kidding, obviously. I want you to be my vice president, said Trump. From his point of view, he thought he only had a 60-40 chance to get the pick.
What is it like running for vice president of the United States? How crazy is this experience?
It's pretty weird. I was just telling you this earlier, but the first time that I've been in a public spot without Secret Service in the room is right now. So I'm like looking around for these guys because I'm used to just having them. It's 3 months, right? So I started to realize that Trump was thinking pretty seriously about making me his VP nominee probably earlier this year, because he would ask me a lot about who I thought the VP nominee should be.
Oh boy!
And I'd give him, yeah, exactly. And I'd give him, names of people that I thought would be pretty good at it. And a lot of the names that I gave him, he would criticize, and I almost felt like he was inviting me to throw myself out there. But he asked me the Monday of the RNC convention, which I think was June 15th. And I really didn't know that morning. I thought that he was probably going to pick me, but I didn't know for sure. Probably 60-40, basically. And so I had no idea. I get the call around 1 o'clock at Milwaukee time at the RNC convention. I'm hanging out with my kid. Another one of my kids is in the other room asleep because, our kids are young, so they nap still. Well, actually, what happened is I get a text message from a staff member on his team that says he just missed a very important phone call. And I don't know, because there's so much inbound traffic that I think it just went straight to voicemail. So I call him back and I'm like, hey, sir, what's going on? He said, JD, you just missed a very important phone call. I'm going to have to pick somebody else now. So I'm about to shit a brick here. And then he says, no, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I want you to be my vice president. And the funny thing is, my 7-year-old is in the background and he has no idea what's going on. And I love that, right? It's one of the good things about this. He has no clue what's going on. He's like, Dad, who are you talking to? He's talking about Pokemon cards. Trump hears my son in the background and he says, well, who's that? And I said, that's my 7-year-old son, and he's like, put him on the phone. And I'm just anxious for him to get this statement out, because in my mind, It's not final until the statement is actually out. And he talks to my son, and he reads the statement that he is going to put out on Truth Social announcing that I'm the VP nominee of the Republican Party. And he's like, what do you think about that, Ewan? And my son Ewan's like, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then he gives the phone back to me. He's like, I have no idea what the hell's going on.
He doesn't even know what that means.
Yeah, he has no idea. And of course, I remember this story because in particular, and the Madison Square Garden rally of a few days ago was the first time that my son actually met Donald Trump. So he'd spoken to him on the phone, but hadn't actually met him until the rally at MSG. And my 7-year-old really wanted to tell him a joke, and he remembers this phone conversation. And so he tells him this joke, and Trump kind of chuckles, but also is probably judging me because it was a somewhat inappropriate joke for a 7-year-old to tell. But here we are.
Well, that's the only ones 7-year-olds remember.
That's right. Well, it's like, I have terrible language. I mean, it's one of my many flaws, but I was raised by my very working class grandmother, and she was actually, very interestingly, she was a very devout Christian, but she also had, a language that would make a sailor blush. And so I talk like that because I was raised by this woman.
Those are fun ladies.
Those are fun ladies, man. She was she was awesome. She was an amazing person, a huge personality, right? We called her a force of nature because she was such this big personality. But my wife's rule is, basically he's only allowed to cuss when he's telling this one joke. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah, so he told this joke to Donald Trump. Yeah, exactly. He says it 14 times a day.
Vance makes it clear that his family is very important to him, despite the newfound responsibility brought upon them. Family intersections with his political career provide a grounding influence to keep him sane. Vance shares his visceral reaction to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which he experienced while mini-golfing with his family. He describes going into fight or flight mode, immediately gathering his children and preparing for any threat by loading his guns. He recounts, "I grab my kids up, throw them in the car, go home and load all my guns, and basically stand like a sentry at our front door."
The morning that he was shot in Butler, PA, was the first time that he and I ever talked about it. So that was a Saturday, just thinking about it. I guess it was probably June 13th, because I think the convention started June 15th. I go down to Mar-a-Lago that morning, Saturday morning, and I'm talking to him for the first time, because the media would ask me, I was like one of the rumored shortlist candidates. I kept on getting these questions from reporters. Have you ever had this conversation with Trump? And the honest answer was no. Well, Saturday morning that changed, because I go down there and he's like, what do you think? Why should I choose you? Why should I not choose these other guys? But you don't really know, because when Donald Trump sat me down, he talked about 10 different people that he was thinking about naming. And this was 2 days before he made the selection.
So he's playing like a little, let's see how JD thinks game.
Yeah, I think so. He told me that he was talking to the gardener at Mar-a-Lago about who the vice presidential nominee should be. And that's one of, I think, Trump's sort of political geniuses, is he talks to everybody about everything. I was like, well, what did the gardener at Mar-a-Lago have to say about this conversation? Because this really directly impacts my life. He basically said, well, I think I'm probably going to pick you, but I don't know, and I'm not ready to make a decision. And then he looks at one of his staff members who's in the room. He's like, actually, wouldn't it really set the world ablaze if we just made the decision today? And so why don't you come up with me and we'll just do the announcement in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Whoa.
And I said, and of course not knowing at the time what was going to happen, I was like, absolutely, let's get this over with, because I'm sick of not knowing. Let's just get this thing over with. And then he's like, no, I'm not gonna do it up there. We need to prepare for it better. So look, I'm not saying it's going to be you, but I'm thinking very seriously about it. Have fun. We'll see after Butler, PA. And then of course I go back home to Ohio.
Oh boy.
He gets shot. The initial reaction is I actually thought they had killed him, because when you first see the video, he grabs his ear and then he goes down. And I'm like, oh my God, they just killed him. And I was first I was so pissed. But then I go into like fight or flight mode with my kids. I'm like, all right, kids, we were at a mini golf place in Cincinnati, Ohio. I grab my kids up, throw them in the car, go home and load all my guns, and basically stand like a sentry at our front door.
Holy shit.
And that was sort of my reaction to it.
Vance expresses his hope to investigate the incident further if their ticket wins, hinting at deeper concerns about security and political stability within the United States government. Vance shares insights into balancing family life with his political career, mentioning how the newcome spotlight on his family has changed their whole dynamic. We go on vacation, and yeah, you'd have people stop and ask to take a photo or say something, nice. But right now it's literally impossible for us to go anywhere.
I definitely thought, okay, obviously this is a big thing, right? And I talked about it with my wife a lot, because she was a working corporate litigator. She's got a very big career. She's much smarter than I am. And it was a marital conversation, in some ways a tough one, because, even though, I'm a senator, we're still pretty anonymous. When we go on vacation, you'd have people stop and ask to take a photo or say something, nice. But most people, if you went somewhere, didn't know who you were. Right now, it's literally impossible for us to go anywhere.
What's that shift feel like? Like you're 40 years old, right? So
yeah, I mean,
like this, just off a cliff, complete different life.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, in some ways it's really nice, because people come up and say really nice things to you. They tell you they're praying for your kids, they're praying for your family.
It
but it's
depends
also
on where you
very
go,
weird.
though, doesn't it? Like if you go through Brooklyn.
Sure, no, of course, yeah.
Go through the super woke, blue-haired parts of Brooklyn.
It's interesting. When we were in New York for the MSG rally, a few people saw me and flashed the universal New York sign for "We're number one," right? So they like us even in New York City. But it's definitely weird to just not be anonymous at all anymore.
This reminds us that politicians, for the most part, still try and live normal lives. Fame has its downsides. This shows us how political views and unexpected fame can influence the toll public engagement takes on someone. The conversation veers into transgender rights, particularly in sports. Vance uses his role as a father to frame his concerns about transgender athletes competing with his daughter, stating, "I don't want her going into athletic competitions where I'm terrified she's going to get bludgeoned to death because we're allowing a 6'1" male to compete with her in sports."
They're ignoring all of these signs because it doesn't line up with this ideology that they subscribe to.
That's right.
Like, you have to support trans kids. Like, okay, what are you even saying? How is this a new thing so pervasive? How is it everywhere? And how are you letting them compete with girls in school? That one drives me bananas. When you have biological males, all they have to do is, they don't even have requirements in some schools. You don't have to be taking hormones. You could just identify and you can compete as a girl.
And of course, that causes injury to the young girls.
Of course.
And again, this gives me faith in the wisdom of the American people, because if you see how radically the Democrats leaned into this stuff 4 years ago, and how much Kamala Harris is running away from it today, most Americans, they don't really care who you sleep with. They're pretty open-minded about most lifestyle choices. But when you talk about having a biological male compete with their teenage girl in competitive sports, Americans are saying, no. This is crazy. You're causing injury to my kids. We have to stop this.
Not only that, it ruins chances of getting scholarships. If you were the number one player and then all of a sudden some guy comes along who wears lipstick, now he's the number one girl on the team. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
There was a recent pool tournament in England. It's a women's pool tournament, and in the semifinals, two guys are playing each other.
Yeah. Well, and it looks, when you see them in the actual swimming pool competing, it looks like the biological males are running at 1.5x speed and everybody else is running at normal speed, right? This is just clearly different. And to your point about it destroys opportunities for scholarships, I mean, go back to the original reason why we wanted girls' sports, why we have Title IX in the United States of America to begin with. Like, we recognized that competitive sports, what does it teach, right? It teaches you how to participate on a team. It teaches you to recognize your own weaknesses and the strengths of your teammates and vice versa, right? Like, I'm the father of a 2-year-old daughter. I want my daughter to learn these important life skills. I don't want her going into athletic competitions where I'm terrified she's going to get bludgeoned to death because we're allowing a 6'1" male to compete with her in sports where you should not have biological males competing with biological females.
Not only that, but they get to change with them in the locker rooms. Like, there was one in Canada where a 50-year-old man identified as a teenage girl. He was a professor. He was changing. He was in a swim meet with teenage girls.
Yeah.
And he's changing in the same locker room as them. And then
it's crazy.
The problem with that is there's a psychological condition called autogynephilia. And autogynephilia is where men are sexually aroused by the idea of dressing and behaving like a woman, but they're heterosexual. Now, all of a sudden, these people with this known psychiatric disorder are allowed to just identify as a woman, and you're a bigot if you don't let them change in the women's room.
And you're expected to empower them at the expense of young women who are very often much more vulnerable for obvious reasons than young men.
Rogan and Vance also touch on the legal and cultural battles surrounding transgender participation in sports. They reflect on the intersection of personal beliefs and public policy. The current status quo must change. Rogan introduces the idea that being into fitness can lean your political views. Vance then mentions the interesting correlation between testosterone levels and political leanings. Have you seen all these studies that basically connect testosterone levels in young men with conservative politics? He asks. They explore how physical activity and discipline might translate into political ideology. It's an interesting realization that the everyday actions someone takes can potentially be indicative of their political leanings.
There's very few things that will turn you into a conservative more than martial arts training. There's no way to get ahead other than hard work.
Well, have you seen all these studies that basically connect testosterone levels in young men with conservative politics?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe that's what's going on.
Well, there's a certain amount
maybe that's
of
why the Democrats want us all to be, poor health and overweight. If you make people less healthy, they apparently become more politically liberal. That's an interesting observation.
Well, I think there's like socially liberal, like live and let live, do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody, which is really what I am. And then the reality
these labels get all confused, right? Yeah.
And this is where it gets sort of conflated, like the reality of hard work being a virtue.
Yes.
And this has always been a conservative idea, is that you're really supposed to like make your mark in this world and get up in the morning and work hard, and you should be proud of that.
Yes.
The only way to get good at jiu-jitsu is hard work.
Yes.
So everybody who really trains hard and gets good has a certain level of just a true understanding of the real relationship of focused time, energy, and discipline versus positive results.
Yep.
And there's only one way to excel. There's no other way to excel.
That's right.
Interesting. This could connect physical health with political philosophy, which would suggest a potential biological basis for some political inclinations. Vance criticizes the influence of the pharmaceutical industry, especially in advertising and public health policy. They also touch on the skepticism around certain vaccines, reflecting Vance's personal experience. He points out, one of the reasons why we don't have more people asking questions about Big Pharma, of course, is the entire national media.
I took the vax and, I haven't been boosted or anything. The moment where I really started to get red-pilled on the whole vax thing was the sickest that I've been in the last 15 years by far was when I took the vaccine. And I've had COVID at this point 5 times. I was in bed for 2 days. My heart was racing. I was like, the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about that, even, no like serious injury, but even the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about the fact that I was as sick as I've ever been for 2 days, and the worst COVID experience I had was like a sinus infection. I'm not really willing to trade that. A lot of people I know, they talk about the second shot that they got of the vaccine that made them really, really sick. Well, that's a side effect, and not a side effect that we even talk about enough in this country.
No, it's also, again, we're talking about companies that have a long history of lying and being forced to pay criminal fines, and then we're giving them this exemption from being responsible for any of the side effects.
Yeah, and who do you think those big pharma companies donate to politically in 2024? I'll give you a big fat guess.
Probably Kamala Harris.
By a significant margin. This is, I think, one of the reasons why we don't have more people asking questions about big pharma.
Of course.
Is the entire national media. Think about how many pharmaceutical advertisements you watch when you watch a football game.
One of the things that happened that separated us from the rest of the world, other than New Zealand, is in the 1990s they allowed pharmaceutical drug companies to advertise.
That's right.
Is that something that has to stay that way? Is that something that can be changed with policy, or is the financial incentives of that too big to move?
Oh, you could change it with policy. So I've been critical of pharmaceutical advertising for a long time. My assumption is that there are not enough people who would like to do it to actually get it done.
I bet that's one of those things, if you put it to a national vote, instead of representatives, the problem with representatives is special interest groups.
Yeah.
Special interest groups and lobbyists and the amount of money.
The whole conduit of money into politics is fundamentally broken. I think we have to fix that. But here's the thing, and I say this as a critic of pharmaceutical advertising. Whenever I see a pharma ad, and I pretty much only see them when I'm watching football, I'm always shocked that they actually influence anybody, right? Because it's like, oh, take this drug for rheumatoid arthritis, and you can have all these positive experiences. And it's like, oh, the side effects are, erectile dysfunction, rashes on your face,
suicidal
ideation, tumors in your brain, and you'll hate yourself and be depressed. So you'll need this other drug. And I always wonder, like, you get so many of these weird side effects in the advertisements. How do they actually work? So I actually think that the real corruption is not really that they like persuade Americans. I mean, if you're going to take a drug, you're probably going to take a drug based on conversations with your doctor more than a pharma advertisement, but they do corrupt the media ecosystem. Because if you're getting all that money from the pharma companies, then you're not going to launch investigations into some of the things you should be launching investigations into.
The impact of pharmaceutical ads on television and the potential for policy changes regarding these ads is key in the Trump-Vance presidency. The American people don't want it. Environmental concerns are brought up, with Vance offering a critique on the focus of the environmental movement. He says, "It's interesting that the environmental movement in America, the only thing that it talks about is the carbon footprint, and it never talks about why do we have the highest rates of obesity in the world right now? They discuss the broader implications of the current left-leaning environmental policy, including the green initiatives on other aspects of public health.
One of the weirdest things is if you are on the wrong side of their ideology, like if you're aligned with Trump, like RFK Jr. is, now all of a sudden I've seen like people on the left that are trying to dismiss a lot of the things that he says about additives in food, about atrazine, fluoride in the wall, all these different things, because now they're connecting not having toxins in your food with a right-wing idea.
It's crazy. It's mind-blowing.
It's so bananas. Like even being healthy, fitness. They're connecting fitness with a right-wing idea.
Yeah. Well, and it raises one of my sort of core political beliefs is that our politics is focused on fake shit and distractions to distract us from the real stuff. If I'm looking at the environmental movement in the United States of America, and I don't even have like strong views on what the carbon footprint ultimately does. I'm sort of skeptical of the experts here, but I'm also skeptical of, the other side. I just don't really know what I think about this. I think it's insane to try to eliminate fossil fuels. That's kind of a belief that I have. But it's interesting that the environmental movement in America, the only thing that it talks about is the carbon footprint. And it never talks about like, oh, why do we have the highest rates of obesity in the world right now? Right? Why is it that American kids spend less time outdoors in nature than they ever have in the history of our 250-year civilization? There's this weird way in which we get distracted by the fake stuff instead of focusing on the real stuff. And I think there is a really very important environmental conversation to be had. And one of the first things that happened when I was a senator is you had this terrible train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. Got a lot of headlines. And it was a mistake at the time that wasn't obvious. They basically set off a few of the chemical cars, which, I mean, if you see the images, it looks like a nuclear bomb went off in East Palestine, Ohio. But it's putting vinyl chloride and all these other pollutants into the water, into the air, into the soil. And it was amazing. The environmental movement almost could not have cared less about a chemical explosion in rural Ohio that is potentially poisoning thousands of people, but they were really, really concerned about the carbon footprint of those same people. I'm sick of the distraction. I think we should focus on the real stuff. And unfortunately, it's true of the environmental policy, but it's true of a lot of other stuff. We just don't talk about the real thing.
The carbon footprint thing is very concerning to me because I'm seeing this concept that being pushed out of having an app that monitors your carbon footprint and limiting the amount of travel you can do and limiting the amount of things.
I know where that's going to go.
Yeah, just control. It's just controlling
it's absolutely
people.
About control.
And if you can do that, then you can get away with a lot of things. You can get away with a lot of policy. Yep. You can get away with a lot of decisions that are made that people wouldn't agree with because you're going to limit so many things about their life. They're going to become accustomed to being governed in that way. It's disturbing to me that there's also profit that's being made off the green movement. There's a lot of people like Bill Gates who have like making a lot of money off of these environmentally conscious things.
$50 million to Kamala Harris, by the way.
Although it is bullshit fake food, that fake meat, which is not good for anybody.
Creeps me out, man.
Read about fake meat, folks. Read about how they're making this. And I'm not talking about 3D printed meat, which is a very different thing, which seems to be at least more consumable. Mm-hmm. But like the plant-based meat stuff, that's garbage. That stuff is garbage. So highly processed garbage.
This brings to light the complexities of environmental policy in the context of health and economic considerations. What seems healthy and sustainable might not be. Follow the money, always. Vance and Rogan discuss how media can control narratives, particularly around political figures and events. They delve into the idea that media might suppress certain viewpoints or stories, with Vance mentioning, "One of the big things that me and President Trump confront all the time is the accusation that we're somehow like in bed with Russia, which is like the dumbest thing in the world to me."
It's very weird, man. We got to look at we have to look at the financial incentives of this. I mean, so one of the big things that me and President Trump confront all the time is the accusation that we're somehow like in bed with Russia, which is like the dumbest thing in the world to me. Like, I don't really care about Russia. I just don't think we should have a nuclear war, like writ large. I'm very anti-nuclear war.
That sounds reasonable.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And one of the things they never interrogate is who is the biggest funder of the green energy movement in Europe? It's the Russians. And why are the Russians funding? It's not because they care about climate change. It's because they want the Germans and everybody else to buy Russian natural gas. And they realize that if the Germans and French close down all their coal and nuclear factories, Russia is going to have them by the balls.
Mine did?
Mine did? Oh, okay.
How?
Joe's did?
Oh, okay. Let's see what's up.
Holy shit. The Russians are monitoring this fucking conversation.
Okay, I'm not going to move. I'm not touching anything. All right, we're back. What were we just talking about?
Well, we were talking about how you asked why do the Germans shut down the nuclear facilities? And I know, it's they're shutting down coal, they're shutting down any of their base power and leaning really into solar and wind. But again, the green energy movement in Europe is heavily funded by the Russians because they produce so much natural gas. They want to have Europe by the balls. Our inability to just ask ourselves, who's getting rich from this stuff? Maybe we should be skeptical of the people getting rich from this stuff is one of our big failures as a political society.
The wildest thing about the laptop was that they were able to suppress it from social media. And
really wild.
When I discussed that with Zuckerberg, and he openly admitted it, that the FBI had contacted him and told him that it was Russian disinformation. Correct. And that was one of those things while he was saying, I was like, this guy's just saying this?
Yeah. Holy shit, he just said the thing that we all suspected for a very long time.
And if it wasn't for Elon purchasing Twitter and then finding out how much of an influence they were having on this, and that they were, in fact, silencing something that they knew to be correct under a lie, and 51 former intelligence agents signed off on this.
That's right.
It was like, how did they pull that off? Pulling that off is really wild. And the fact that there was no outrage from the left, that the left was like, it's fine because it's our side and Trump is evil and he's Hitler. We got to get rid of him. So let's just lie about this laptop.
And no consequences.
Nothing.
Right.
The same people that pushed it are still...
And by the way, they still all have security clearances, I believe, which is going to change. This is where I always get pissed about the media conversation around what happened in 2020. Is what they'll do is they'll sort of find the craziest conspiracy theory about what happened in 2020. They'll debunk it and say, "Oh, look, this shows that nothing bad happened in 2020." There's a nonpartisan organization that actually looked at what would have happened to Americans' votes if they had just known the truth about the fact that Joe Biden fundamentally had traded his political influence for money. That's what it was. It's an old-fashioned American corruption story. I will give you access to powerful people in exchange for money. That was the true scandal of the Hunter Biden laptop. Again, it wasn't Hunter Biden doing cocaine with a stripper.
That was the fun part.
You can say that. I have an election to win. And a nonpartisan organization said that knowledge, which was suppressed by the entire American media and big tech scene, that would have changed millions upon millions of votes. And we know that the number in 4 swing states was 88,000 votes that were the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden winning the 2020 election. We know that it was both the corruption of the FBI and the intelligence services, but also the big technology companies themselves. Both of them are at blame. And I think fundamentally, if they had not done what they did, Donald Trump would have won another term as president of the United States.
The implications of media bias in today's technologically integrated world is no longer something you're able to look away from. And the challenge of accessing unbiased information keeps getting harder, especially while being on the forefront of the AI revolution. This episode of the Joe Rogan Experience with JD Vance offers a multifaceted look at the life and perspectives of the 50th Vice President of the United States. From security concerns to cultural critique, Vance provides insights not just into policy, but into the human side of politics. His discussion with Rogan covers critical issues in today's political landscape with a mix of seriousness and humour. Whether you're into politics, media critique, or just curious about the personal lives of public figures, this episode delivers a rich array of topics that will keep you curious. And that's that. If you learned something new and want to spread some love, we would really appreciate if you hit the bell icon to get a head start on new episodes uploaded every other day. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment below with what you'll miss most from the mind virus we just endured for the last 4+ years. If you want to stay updated, head on over to X and give us a follow at solutionsAI_. All links are super easy to find down in the description and pinned to the top comment. We'd love if you share our stuff with your friends and family too. And most importantly, Be sure to stay curious. See you next time. Sci out.